Sarah Coleman gripped the worn leather strap of her travel bag so tightly her knuckles turned white beneath her gloves. The wind at the Pine Valley station cut through her coat like a blade, biting into her skin and whipping her skirts around her ankles. The train behind her hissed and clanged as it pulled away, leaving her standing alone on the frozen platform with nothing but a name, James Parker, and the echo of a promise that might never have been real. She turned slowly, scanning the bleak clearing where the tracks vanished into fog-wrapped hills. There were no signs, no wagon, no man with a crooked smile and a rough, honest face, just a stray dog sniffing near the edge of the station, and a station master too busy with stacking coal to notice her confusion. Sarah checked the letter once more, creased, smudged with soot, and memorized by heart. Come to Pine Valley. I have a house, a farm, and 7 children who need a mother. I'll be there when you step off the train. JP. She had traveled 3 days from Boston, slept sitting up, shared tea with strangers, and traded her last brooch to a porter in exchange for help lifting her trunks. All for this. All for him. All for... A boy appeared on the far end of the platform. No shoes, tattered coat, pale as paper and staring at her like a ghost. She lifted her chin, forcing the kindest smile she could manage. Are you... she began. You Sarah Coleman? He asked flatly. Her voice caught. Yes. He didn't smile. He's married now, the boy said. Got hitched 2 weeks ago. Sarah blinked. I'm sorry? The boy shrugged like he was used to saying things that didn't make sense to people. Said you wouldn't come. Folks in town told him he was fooling himself. Then he met Grace. She had land. You didn't. Sarah's mouth went dry. Her ears rang. He's married, she repeated, not asking. The boy nodded. I'm Ben, his third oldest. We waited, but he said maybe you'd still come. Maybe not. A gust of wind slammed into her from behind. Her hat nearly flew off. She turned her face away from the boy, but it didn't stop the heat rising in her chest. Embarrassment, anger, shame. They layered like frostbite, numbing and burning all at once. Where is he now? She asked. Up the hill. Cabin's 2 miles that way. He pointed toward the thick woods. You don't gotta go up there. I can tell him you came. No, she said. Her voice didn't shake, though her hands did. I'll go. The boy studied her again, longer this time. You sure? I didn't come this far to be turned away on the platform. He paused, then motioned toward the narrow path leading up into the hills. I'll carry your bag. They walked in silence. The dirt path was frozen and hard, bordered by thorn bush and low pine. Sarah's boots slipped more than once, but she never asked Ben to slow down. Every step into the mountain air was a step further from everything she'd known, and one step closer to something she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. The Parker homestead emerged like a bruise on the hillside, small, gray, sagging under the weight of its own roof. A thin curl of smoke rose from the crooked chimney, and the porch leaned so far left it looked like a breath would knock it down. Ben set her bag down with care. You should know, he said. Grace don't like visitors. Before she could ask more, the front door opened. She recognized James Parker immediately, even without the hat or the clean shave from his letters. He was taller than she'd expected, broader too, but his face looked like it hadn't slept in years. The color drained from it the moment their eyes met. Sarah? He said. She didn't answer, just stood there, frozen, waiting for the rest. A woman stepped out behind him. Grace, no doubt. Pretty in the way wildflowers are. Sharp petals, deep roots. Her hands were on her hips. Her voice, when it came, cracked like firewood. You must be the letter girl. James flinched. Grace, she should go, Grace snapped. You said she wouldn't come. You lied. I didn't lie, he mumbled. I didn't think. You married someone else, Sarah said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. The words struck like flint. James opened his mouth, then closed it. She needs to leave, Grace said again, stepping between them, before the children see her. They already saw. Ben said from the steps. We all did. Go back inside, Grace hissed at him. But he didn't. Instead, he looked straight at Sarah and said, low and simple, We read your letters. Pa kept them in a box. I read them to the little ones at night. Tears stung the corners of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She wasn't here for pity. You wrote me, she said to James. You said they needed a mother. I know, he whispered, but I couldn't wait forever. You didn't answer for weeks. I was gathering money, she said, selling everything I had to get here. Silence swallowed them. Even the trees held their breath. I'll go, Sarah said, but not because she told me to. I'll go because there's no place for someone like me here. She turned, lifting her chin, but before she could take the first step down the hill, Ben's voice reached her again. You could stay by the creek, he said. There's a flat place near the big rocks. You could... I mean... Grace's mouth dropped open. Absolutely not. But James didn't speak. Sarah looked at Ben at his bare feet and steady eyes. He didn't blink. He didn't beg. He just stood there, like a boy waiting for someone to choose him. And she knew. Not all letters reached their destination. Not all promises kept their form. But stories didn't end at the station. Some of them started at the edge of a hill with no roof, and a boy who still believed in what was written between the lines. Show me where, she said. Ben smiled, just barely, and pointed toward the woods. As they vanished down the trail, James didn't call after her. Grace slammed the door shut, but Sarah didn't look back, because the next chapter, whatever it would be, was waiting beside the creek, and she wasn't done writing it yet. The creek whispered as it wound its way past the birch trees, gurgling over stones smoothed by time and storm. Sarah stood just beyond the thicket where Ben had led her, staring at the patch of earth that would now become her shelter. There was no cabin here, no roof, not even a stump to sit on. Just frost-kissed grass, a scattering of flat rocks, and the hollow quiet that came from being well and truly alone. Ben had gone without asking questions, promising to return before sundown. He had left her with a blanket, a dented kettle, and a small canvas sack of matches. No apologies, no goodbyes, just quiet faith, and the gentle ache of a child hoping she wouldn't disappear like everything else. She worked fast. The tent she'd carried from Boston, rolled tightly and strapped beneath her trunk, was too thin for mountain nights, but it would do. She stretched the canvas between two trees, tied the corners to branches with cut twine, and wedged her trunk inside for weight. With some pine needles, a bedroll, and her coat folded double, she managed something close to a nest. When the wind shifted, she caught a hint of wood smoke from the Parker house above the ridge. It didn't make her angry, not yet. Mostly it made her tired. She opened the letter, the first one, from James. The ink had faded in places where her fingers had read it too often. Sarah, I don't need much. Just someone who'll sit at the table and stay. There's 7 of them now. The youngest cries at night. The oldest thinks he's grown. We need someone who'll come for more than a name. She had come. Night fell fast in the mountains. The shadows reached long across the trees and the temperature dropped like a stone. She boiled water from the creek and steeped dry mint leaves from a satchel tucked beneath her corset. Dinner was hard bread and memory. She had just settled in, arms wrapped tight around her knees, when she heard it. Feet, soft, careful, multiple. She didn't move. A small voice called out from the edge of the woods, almost a whisper. Miss Sarah. She turned. 3 children stood there, half hidden by shadows. Ben and 2 girls, one no older than 6, the other perhaps 9, both wrapped in 2 thin shawls and holding hands. I didn't bring them, Ben said quickly. They came. The smallest girl stepped forward. Are you the letter lady? Sarah nodded slowly. I suppose I am. The older girl held something out, a crumpled piece of paper. We brought a story. That's what you do, right? You tell stories. Sarah reached for it. The paper was torn, smudged with dirt. A child's scrawl read, Once there was a mama who lived in the letters, and we missed her even before she came. She couldn't speak. Instead, she opened the flap of the tent and waved them in. They didn't wait for a second invitation. The girls huddled together near the trunk. Ben stayed by the entrance, eyes scanning the trees like someone used to watching for danger. Sarah stoked the tiny fire higher. It crackled with effort, flames licking at the edge of the kettle. She unwrapped a biscuit from her bag, just one, and broke it into 4 parts. "Eat slow," she said. "Let your stomach remember." The girls ate without sound, eyes wide and thankful. Ben didn't take his piece right away. "They'll notice we're gone," he said quietly, "if they look." "Do they usually?" Sarah asked. He shook his head. When the fire settled to glowing coals, she opened her trunk and pulled out a bundle wrapped in blue cloth. Inside were the letters everyone James had sent, some written in rushed script, others more careful. Some pages smelled faintly of tobacco. A few had tear stains, though she couldn't tell whose they were anymore. She picked one at random. "This one's about the spring calf," she said. "He called it Buttons, said it followed Lucy around like a shadow." The little girl, Lucy, smiled for the first time. Sarah read in a soft, steady voice, letting the words settle like snow. She didn't dramatize, she didn't perform. She just let the sentences breathe, and the children breathed with them. When she finished, no one asked for another. They sat in the hush for a long time. Somewhere deep in the woods, a nightbird called. Eventually, Ben stood. "We should go." "Tomorrow?" Lucy asked, her voice barely audible. Sarah nodded. "Tomorrow." They left as quietly as they came, shoes crunching faintly on frosted leaves. Sarah watched until the dark swallowed them whole. When she turned back to the tent, she noticed something new. 3 pairs of small shoes neatly lined up outside the flap. Not forgotten, placed. The next morning, they were gone, but that night they returned, this time with a 4th child and a chipped tin mug. The mug held warm milk, likely stolen or begged from a neighbor. They sat in a tighter circle. They listened longer. Lucy brought a doll with one button eye and asked if the letter Mama knew how to sew. Sarah said yes and meant it. Over the days that followed, the visits became ritual. She didn't ask how they got away or what Grace did when she noticed. She simply read, taught them small songs, let them pick words from the letters to learn new ones. And every night, without fail, the shoes lined up outside her flap. Sarah found herself speaking less and listening more. Their laughter came easier, the bruises faded, their shoulders relaxed. She stitched a new eye on Lucy's doll, repaired the hem on Ben's coat, and she started writing letters again. Not to James, not to anyone back east, to herself. "Dear Sarah," she wrote by firelight, "you may have come to marry a man, but you stayed to meet the children. Maybe that's worth more." She tucked the letter in the mailbox she'd nailed to a tree. The town didn't notice her yet. Grace didn't storm down the trail, but something in the air had shifted. Like the woods themselves had paused to see what would happen next, and Sarah, no longer just a woman with a suitcase, sat beside her fire, waiting not for a husband, but for the sound of footsteps in the dark. The first snow came quietly, fine and dry, settling over the hills like sifted flour. Sarah woke to a thin white veil draped across her tent, and the sharp stillness that only winter brings. The children hadn't come the night before, and though she told herself they were just tired or watched too closely, she couldn't shake the weight in her chest. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stirred the ashes back to life. As the fire bloomed, so did her thoughts, memories of warmth that had never fully belonged to her, and of letters that once promised a home filled with voices, not just echoes. By midday, the trees rustled, not from wind, but footsteps. Ben appeared first, red-cheeked and breathless, dragging something behind him wrapped in old burlap. When he got closer, Sarah realized it was a small wooden box, weather-beaten and crudely nailed shut. He didn't speak until she knelt beside him. "I found it in the barn," he said, voice low. Pa's old letterbox, the one he used before everything. Sarah brushed snow off the lid. "Why bring it here?" Ben's jaw worked like he was trying to chew words he didn't quite trust to say. "Because she tried to burn what was inside." Sarah lifted the lid. Inside were scraps of paper, some still whole, most torn or scorched at the edges. Familiar ink, the curves and loops of James Parker's hand. She recognized phrases she'd read before and some she hadn't. Lines he must have written but never sent. She took the box to the fire and one by one began pulling out the pieces. The children gathered slowly. Emma curled against her side, her breath warm on Sarah's arm. Lucy helped sort the fragments, fitting words together like puzzles. No one spoke much. There was reverence in their silence, as if they were rebuilding something sacred. Hours passed. Snow fell steadily. By dusk, they had stitched together 3 full letters using red thread and glue made from pine resin and flour. The words weren't perfect. Some were guessed, others guessed at, but the meaning remained. In one, James had written, "If she never comes, I'll still read these out loud so they know what it means to wait for kindness." In another, "Tell Sarah the baby laughs when he hears her name. That must mean something." And finally, "I don't know how to be enough for them, but maybe she can be. Maybe her heart's big enough to cover what mine couldn't." Sarah read each letter out loud. The children didn't cry, but their eyes grew wide, and something in them softened, like muscles unclenched after too long held tight. When she finished, Ben passed her the last fragment, no larger than her palm. Burned along one edge and missing a corner, it simply read, "Don't give up on us." She held it close to her chest, pressing it to her heart like a promise she hadn't realized she'd made. Later, after the children left, she didn't pack the letters away. Instead, she tacked them up along the tent wall, letting them flutter like prayer flags in the draft. They were broken, unfinished, and still full of meaning. That night, she lit a second fire. Not because she needed the warmth, but because she needed the light. They came again the next evening, this time with Tommy, the smallest, bundled tight in Ben's coat. His cheeks were chapped raw, but his hands clung to Sarah's skirts like she was something solid in a world too slippery. "I want a letter, too," he whispered. Sarah knelt. "A letter for you?" He nodded. She pulled a scrap of paper from her satchel, smoothed it on her lap, and wrote as she spoke. "Dear Tommy, you are seen, you are held. Even when the world is cold, you are not alone. Love, Mama Sarah." His eyes lit up at the last words. "Mama Sarah," he repeated, like testing how the syllables felt in his mouth. "Do you want to keep it?" she asked. He clutched the paper to his chest like a treasure and nodded. That became the pattern. Each child asked for a letter, not always for them. Sometimes for someone gone or for dreams too big to say out loud. Sarah wrote every one, folded them neatly, sealed them with wax when she could, and placed them in the wooden mailbox nailed to the tree. Some mornings she found drawings there in return, a picture of her reading, a heart, a house with smoke curling from the chimney, and children standing hand in hand on the porch. No one said it aloud, but they all knew what it meant. She was their letter mama. By the week's end, even neighbors had begun to notice. Mrs. Fisher passed by with a jar of pickled beets and a thick wool scarf. "Looks like you're building something real up here," she said, eyeing the tent and the children gathered around it. Sarah smiled. "Not building? Just holding space." Mrs. Fisher gave a knowing nod. "That's the first part of building anything that lasts." But not everyone approved. 2 nights later, the children arrived later than usual, their clothes wet, hair matted with melting snow. Emma had a split lip. Ben's knuckles were raw. "She found the letters," Lucy said quietly. "Grace, she said they're poison." Sarah swallowed the hot, bitter ache rising in her throat. "Did she hurt you?" Ben shook his head but didn't meet her eyes. "She said if we came back here again, she'd send us away. Said we're not hers and we don't belong to you." Sarah took a deep breath and opened her arms. They came without hesitation. That night, she added something new to the mailbox. A bell, a soft, worn thing that had once hung from her family's front porch back in Boston. She tied it with red ribbon and let it sway in the wind. A message not just to the children, but to the mountain itself. "There's a place for you. There's a fire waiting. There's someone listening." And when she finally crawled inside the tent, the wind howled harder than before. The snow deepened. But she was no longer alone because in the dark, between the rustle of canvas and the hush of sleeping breath, she could hear it, the bell ringing softly in the wind. A voice without words, carrying the promise of the next chapter. It started with a sound, a cry too sharp to be wind. Sarah bolted upright, her quilt tangled around her legs, the fire down to glowing coals. She pushed aside the canvas flap just as Ben appeared, running full tilt down the hill, his breath forming clouds in the frozen night air. "She's gone," he gasped. "Emma, she ran." Sarah didn't ask why, she didn't need to. She grabbed her shawl, tucked her boots tight, and followed him up the path without hesitation. The storm had broken hours earlier, laying thick snow across the trail. The climb was slow, ice slicking the rocks beneath the drifts. The only guide they had were small, frantic footprints weaving away from the Parker house and down toward the creek. "Grace hit her," Ben said, teeth clenched. "For stealing biscuits, said she was feeding you, said you were poisoning us with stories." Sarah said nothing, but her chest burned hotter with every step. They found Emma near the bend in the creek, curled under a felled log, her dress soaked through and her lips a pale blue. Her small body trembled like a bird held in bare hands. Sarah knelt slowly. "Emma, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing wet curls from the girl's forehead. "I'm here." Emma didn't open her eyes, but she leaned into the touch like it was warmth itself. Ben wrapped her in his coat. Sarah lifted her into her arms, the weight too light for a girl her age. "She was trying to come to you," Ben said. "That's all." Back at the tent, Sarah stoked the fire high and pulled every blanket she owned around the girl. She boiled water, added pine bark and dried yarrow, then soaked cloths and pressed them to Emma's feet and hands. The other children had followed them silently, one by one. Lucy carried fresh kindling. Tommy brought the cup he used for warm milk. Katie, the eldest of the girls, hovered close, eyes wide and frightened. The tent felt smaller than ever, crowded and thick with worry. "Will she die?" Tommy asked, voice barely above a breath. "No," Sarah said. "Not tonight." She didn't sleep. She kept vigil, changing compresses, whispering lullabies she barely remembered learning. And slowly, just before dawn, Emma's skin warmed. Her fingers twitched. Her lashes fluttered. "She's coming back," Lucy whispered. Sarah didn't answer. She just pressed a kiss to the girl's forehead and let the tears fall, hot and silent. The next morning, Sheriff Davis stood at the edge of the clearing. His coat was buttoned to his chin and frost clung to his mustache. He didn't draw his weapon, didn't shout. He just stood there as if weighing something heavy in his hands. "You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest," he said. Sarah straightened. She stood between the sheriff and the tent, her chin lifted. "She was nearly frozen," she said. "She ran to me. I didn't take her. Grace says otherwise. She's calling it kidnapping, claims you're corrupting the children." "Then ask them," Sarah said. The sheriff's eyes flicked past her to the little faces inside the tent, half hidden by canvas and steam. "I'm not here to arrest anyone," he said, "but the town's watching. You've got no name here, no claim. You're not kin." "I have their trust," Sarah said. He nodded once. "That may not be enough." With that, he turned and walked back the way he came, his boots crunching through snow that hadn't yet settled into stillness. Sarah watched him go, her shoulders tight. That evening, the children gathered as they always did. Emma was propped against a stack of folded blankets, sipping tea. Her cheeks were pink again, her smile weak but real. Katie came to Sarah with a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this," she said, holding it out. "Can you read it back to me, out loud?" Sarah opened it carefully. "Dear letter mama, I think you saved her. Not just now, but before too. When you came, maybe we're not yours by law, but you're ours anyway, even if the sheriff doesn't know it yet." She read it twice, then once more, slowly. Katie leaned against her arm when it was done and didn't move for a long time. That night, they built something new, not a fire, but a message. Ben dragged a plank from the woodshed behind the Parker house. Lucy brought paint from the schoolhouse, stolen or borrowed, no one asked. Together they painted a sign, "The Letter House." They nailed it beside the mailbox, and in the morning someone had left a loaf of fresh bread and a jar of blackberry jam on the stump near the path. No note, no signature, but Sarah understood. The town was beginning to see, and so was Grace. 2 days later, Grace came down the hill. She was alone, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, eyes hard as ice. Sarah saw her before she spoke, rising from the fire with calm she didn't feel. "They're mine," Grace said. "Not yours?" "They don't think so." "They're confused. You're filling their heads with lies and pity." "I'm giving them something you can't." "What?" "Stories," Grace scoffed. "Fairy tales don't fix hunger. They don't fix loss." "No," Sarah said, "but they fix hearts. And that's where hunger begins." Grace's jaw clenched. "I'll see you gone." "Then you'll have to go through them," Sarah said, and nodded toward the children gathered behind her, silent, still watching. Grace turned, cloak snapping in the wind. She didn't look back. That night, Sarah wrote a new letter. "Dear mountain, dear creek, dear wind, they came to me with nothing and I came with less, but between us we've made something whole. They call this place the Letter House, and I intend to earn the name." She folded the letter and placed it in the mailbox. The bell rang once, faint and certain, and deep in the night, when the stars burned cold and sharp above the trees, Sarah dreamed not of Boston or James or the life she thought she'd have, but of footprints in fresh snow and small hands reaching for hers in the dark. The next chapter was already coming. She could feel it in the stillness, and she would be ready. The first time Sarah heard the preacher's voice, it wasn't from a pulpit. It came from behind her tent, quiet but deliberate, on a morning cold enough to freeze the steam rising from the tea kettle. "You're the woman they talk about," he said, "the one with the letters and the stolen children." She turned slowly, brush in hand, halfway through combing knots from Lucy's hair. Pastor Anderson stood tall in his long coat, snow clinging to his boots, a small leather Bible tucked beneath one arm like a badge. "I'm the woman they came to," Sarah replied. His gaze swept over the clearing, the smoldering fire, the patched quilts hanging to dry, the shoes neatly lined at the flap of the tent. Behind her, Katie continued mending a ripped sleeve, pretending not to listen. Tommy played with sticks, drawing shapes in the snow. "I don't deal in gossip," he said. "I deal in truth." "Then you're in the right place," she answered, returning to Lucy's hair, "because they've had enough lies to last a lifetime." He didn't leave. Instead, he stepped forward and crouched beside Tommy. "What are you drawing, son?" Tommy shrugged. "A house? It's got a door that don't lock." The preacher looked at Sarah again, this time with something softer in his expression. Curiosity, maybe, or guilt. "I came to see for myself," he admitted. "The sheriff says you've caused division. Grace claims you've ruined her family, but this?" He nodded toward the children, toward the fire, the warmth, the quiet hum of belonging. "Doesn't look like ruin." Sarah paused, her brush still in hand. "What does it look like to you?" He stood, dusted snow from his knees. "It looks like church." That evening, Pastor Anderson returned, not alone, but with a bundle of firewood and a leather pouch of dried apples. He didn't say much, just nodded and took a seat by the fire. The children looked at Sarah, unsure. "It's all right," she said. "Let him stay." He listened as Sarah read from one of the salvaged letters. He didn't interrupt when Katie added her own, written in careful pencil script, about the way her baby brother used to giggle when their mother sang. He accepted a bowl of soup from Lucy and said grace quietly under his breath. When he left, he pressed a folded sheet of paper into Sarah's hand. It was a copy of a letter James Parker had written to the church before his marriage to Grace. "If Sarah Coleman arrives and I am gone or unable, I entrust my children to her care. She has no family, no title, but she has heart, and that's what they'll need more than anything else." The ink had faded, but the meaning hadn't. Sarah sat by the fire long after the others had gone to sleep, the paper warming between her palms. She didn't cry, but she felt something shift, like a door opening somewhere she hadn't dared knock. The next day, word spread, not through proclamation, but through action. The widow Fisher arrived with wool scraps and a bar of homemade soap. Then came Mr. Henderson, the town blacksmith, with nails and a board to reinforce the tent frame. One neighbor offered a kettle, another brought eggs. They didn't say they supported her, they just left things behind. Small acts of alliance that made the ground under her feel a little more solid. The children noticed. Their shoulders loosened. Their jokes returned. Even Katie smiled again. Rarely, but truly. But peace never comes without interruption. 3 days later, James returned. He rode into the clearing just before dusk, the breath of his horse rising in clouds. He looked older, thinner, like the snow had worn him down from the inside out. He didn't dismount right away, just sat there, watching. The children froze. Tommy backed into Sarah's skirts. Katie stepped forward instinctively, her chin sharp with defiance. Sarah stepped between them all. "James," she said flat. "Sarah," his voice cracked. "What do you want?" He dismounted slowly, not threatening, not proud, just tired. "I came to see if it's true that they chose you." "You didn't need to come for that. You could have just asked them." His gaze shifted to the children. They didn't speak, but their eyes said everything. Ben looked straight at his father, then turned back toward the tent without a word. James winced. "I never meant to hurt them," he said. "But you did." I thought I had to move on. Grace, she said you'd never come." Sarah's voice didn't rise. It was steady as stone. "And you believed her. You married another woman, then let your children find someone else to hold them. I didn't stop them." "You didn't stop anyone," she snapped. "That's the problem." He stood there, arms limp, not knowing what to do with them. She took a breath. "Why are you really here?" James reached into his satchel and pulled out a worn journal, the mate to the letter book she'd found weeks ago. He opened it to the last page. It read, "If she comes and I've made a mess of things, let her stay anyway. If she chooses to stay, let her raise them if they'll let her, and if they do, don't get in her way." He handed it to her without another word. Sarah didn't move for a moment. Then she took it, closed it, and nodded once. "You can go," she said. James looked at his children one last time, but none stepped forward. Katie crossed her arms. Tommy hid behind Lucy. He turned and left. That night the fire burned bright. The preacher came again. So did the widow Fisher. Someone brought molasses cake. Someone else added a blanket to the pile. They didn't talk about James. They didn't need to. Instead, the children told stories. Real ones, made-up ones, funny ones. And when the last bowl had been scraped clean and the fire dimmed to embers, Katie came to Sarah and asked a question she'd never dared before. "Can we call this home?" Sarah looked around, the patch quilts, the shoes lined up, the bells swaying in the wind, the letters tucked into every corner. "Yes," she said. "I think it already is." And in that answer was a seed planted deep. The storm had passed, but something else was coming, something official. But for now, they had this night, and each other. The letter came folded in thirds, sealed with a red wax stamp, and dusted with road grit. Sheriff Davis brought it himself, riding up to the letter house just after breakfast, with his shoulders stiff and eyes lowered. Sarah met him halfway down the path, her hands dusted with flour from the morning's biscuit dough. He didn't speak right away. He just held the paper out to her like it weighed more than it should. "A formal order," he said, "from the county seat. They're sending men, 2 of them, end of the week." Sarah took the letter but didn't open it. Not yet, not where the children could see. "They want to assess the situation," the sheriff went on, voice low. "See if the children should be relocated. If your presence here is lawful." She didn't flinch. "And do you think it is?" He hesitated, then looked her in the eye. "I think they're better fed than they ever were. I think they smile more, sleep more. And I think that matters more than stamps and signatures." She nodded, tucked the letter into her apron, and turned back toward the clearing. The sheriff didn't follow. Inside the tent, the children were already watching. Ben sharpening sticks into toy arrows. Lucy kneading dough with her small hands. Katie, quiet in the corner, sewing another patch onto the quilt. "They're coming?" Katie asked, like she already knew. Sarah nodded. 2 men from the county. Friday. Silence settled over them like fog. "What do we do?" Lucy whispered. We tell the truth, Sarah said, that this is a home and we made it together. That afternoon, the letter house buzzed with purpose. Tommy dragged stones to ring the fire. Emma swept the tent floor until it shone with effort. Katie organized the letters, binding them in twine, stacking them beside the mailbox like sacred texts. Sarah gathered the children and led them to the edge of the woods, to the old hollow tree where they buried small secrets and big fears. She handed each of them a paper square. "Write it," she said. "The reason you're here, what this place means to you." They wrote in silence. Even Tommy scratched letters with help from Lucy. Sarah didn't look at their words. Not yet. She placed each one in a tin box and tucked it deep inside the roots of the tree. "Why hide them?" Ben asked. "So if anyone ever tries to erase what we built," she said, "we'll have proof it was real." That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She sat by the fire watching shadows dance across the canvas, listening for footsteps that hadn't yet come. The red sealed letter lay open in her lap now, its language clipped and cold. Unregistered guardianship, absence of legal marriage, allegations of interference in parental authority. A representative will arrive to assess custody status. In other words, you don't belong here. But she did. She belonged more here than she ever had in any parlor, boarding house, or train car. This was where she became needed. Friday came with snow flurries and the bite of wind that meant winter had roots now. Sarah tied her hair back with a ribbon and wore the only dress not patched at the hem. The children dressed as best they could, clean shirts, brushed hair, fingers crossed behind their backs. They waited by the fire until the men arrived. Two of them, one lean and tall, the other broader, dressed in an overcoat too fine for mountain travel. Their boots crunched up the path like judgment itself. They didn't smile, didn't offer names. "We're looking for Sarah Coleman," the tall one said. "You found her," Sarah said. The broad one looked around. "And these are the Parker children?" "They're the children who live here." "That's not what I asked." "It's what I answered." He didn't like that. His mouth tightened. "We'll be speaking to them, separately." Ben stepped forward. "We speak together." The tall man frowned. "That's not procedure." Sarah crossed her arms. "Then you're going to have to adjust your procedure." They started with Katie. She didn't flinch. She sat on a stump, hands folded, eyes direct. "She feeds us," she said. "She reads to us, teaches us. When I cry at night, she doesn't pretend not to hear." "And your father?" one of the men asked. "He left twice, first when Mama died, then when she came." The man scribbled something. They moved to Ben, then Lucy. Then Tommy, who didn't speak much but showed them the letter Sarah had written just for him. "Dear Tommy, you are seen. You are held." The men looked uncomfortable reading it, like it contained something they didn't know how to name. Finally, they turned to Sarah. "You've got no legal standing," the broad man said. "No papers, no marriage, no claim to this land." She held up James Parker's journal. "I have this." They skimmed the pages, lips pursed. "He was no judge," the tall man said. "No," she said, "but he was a father, and he chose me before he died." "But he didn't marry you?" "No," she said, "but he trusted me. And more importantly, they do." She looked around, her eyes sweeping over every child, each one standing tall not because they'd been told to, but because they believed in her. The tall man turned to his partner. "We'll need to bring this back for review." They started down the path without another word. But before they reached the bottom, Katie stepped into their way. "You forgot something," she said. They looked confused. She pointed to the mailbox. "Your answer." The tall one raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" Katie held out a sealed envelope addressed in pencil. Inside was her letter, the one she'd buried, the one she'd pulled back out that morning because she'd decided it was better above ground. They took it. They didn't say goodbye. That night, the letter house was quiet. No stories, no games, just a single lantern burning and the sound of boots drying by the fire. Sarah sat beside the mailbox, her eyes scanning the trees, the trail, the place where answers would come from, eventually. She didn't know what the law would say, but she knew what mattered. She reached into the mailbox and found a drawing left by Tommy, a stick figure family, her in the center. All of them holding hands. No judge could undo that. Not now, not ever. The letter from the county never came. Days passed, then a week. The trail remained empty. No riders, no wagons, no stamped envelope pressed into the sheriff's hand. The children asked daily, their voices tight with hope and dread. No news is good news, Sarah told them, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Instead of waiting, they kept living. Katie took over the cooking, adding wild herbs and scrap vegetables like a seasoned pioneer. Ben built a second wood bin by the fire and taught Tommy how to split kindling. Lucy and Emma started keeping a tally on the inside of the tent flap. How many nights they'd slept without fear. The count rose every day. Sarah watched them grow into the space they'd built, each one of them stretching just enough to fill the cracks that once held their sorrow. She found herself sleeping deeper, worrying less, and smiling without realizing it. Even the wind, sharp as ever, seemed to hum with something gentler. Then one morning, just as the frost began melting off the porch railing, a girl appeared at the edge of the clearing. She couldn't have been more than 16, barefoot, hair tangled, a threadbare blanket wrapped around her shoulders. In her arms, a baby, swaddled in what looked like a man's shirt, the sleeves tied into knots. The girl didn't speak. She didn't step forward. She just stood there, shaking, her eyes hollow and wide, as if she were expecting to be turned away. It was Lucy who moved first. She walked out slowly, then turned to Sarah and whispered, "She's like us." Sarah stepped off the porch and met the girl halfway. Up close, she saw the cracked lips, the fever-glazed eyes of the baby, the wild panic clinging to the girl's bones. "Can I come in?" the girl asked, barely audible. Sarah opened her arms. "You're not late," she said. "You're right on time." Inside, the tent felt warmer than it had in weeks. Katie took the baby without hesitation, cradling it with the sure hands of someone who had once held her own sibling the same way. Ben brought water. Emma handed the girl a biscuit she'd saved from breakfast. No one questioned her, no one asked where she came from. They just made space. Her name was Mary. The baby's name was Danny. Sarah tucked them into her bedroll that night and sat by the fire long after the others slept. Mary had said little, just that she walked all night following the stories. She'd heard of the letter house from a woman in the next town, someone who said, "They don't turn you away there, not if you're real lost." Sarah stared into the flames, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of broth. Lost. That's what they all had been once. Not ruined, not broken. Just wandering without anyone to say, "I see you. Stay." The next morning, Mary cried over boiled eggs. Not because they were hot or rare or flavored just right, but because no one had ever handed her something warm without asking what she was worth first. She stayed. No one asked her to, she just did. She helped Katie mend seams. She read to Tommy in the evenings. She cleaned the creek bucket and helped Emma with her letters. Her laugh came slowly, then more often. She moved like someone learning to take up space without apology. One night, after the children had gone to sleep, Mary sat beside Sarah and said, "You didn't ask what I did, or why I left." "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready," Sarah replied. "I ran," Mary said, "from a man who said the baby was a mistake, from a mother who said it was my punishment, from a church that called me a shame." Sarah's jaw tightened. She didn't interrupt. "I thought if I kept walking, maybe I'd just stop existing. But then I saw the shoes on your porch all lined up, and it felt like a door I hadn't earned." Sarah placed a hand gently over hers. It was never about earning it, just choosing to walk through it. Mary wept softly then, not like a girl, but like a woman who had held in every breath too long. Later that week, neighbors started bringing more than food. A man named Wilson dropped off lumber scraps and said, "You'll need more space come spring." Mrs. Fisher arrived with seed packets and asked if the children had ever planted a garden. The preacher returned with hymnals and a note from his wife. "You're more than a cause. You're a beginning." Even the sheriff brought something, a rusted kettle he'd cleaned up and repainted. He didn't say why, just handed it over and muttered, "Heats faster." Sarah watched the porch fill with offerings. They came without fanfare, without expectations. Not charity, not obligation, just belief. One morning, as she swept out the tent, she found a folded piece of paper tucked into the mailbox. It wasn't signed. "If anyone asks, tell them we saw the truth up here. Not the law, not the rumor, but the truth." And it had your face. She held the paper close for a long time. Later that day, Katie gathered everyone and made a declaration. "We're not calling it a tent anymore," she said. "It's the house now. Just the house, that's what it is." So they called it the house. They hung fabric across the entrance, pinned up drawings on the walls, and named each corner after something they'd claimed back. Laughter, warmth, trust, tomorrow. That night, a storm rolled through. Snow and wind beat the sides of the house until it groaned. But the fire never went out, the roof held, the walls didn't buckle. And neither did Sarah, because in the morning, when the trail filled with sunlight again and the creek ran louder with meltwater, she heard the bell ring. Not from the wind, but from a hand. A man had arrived, tall, weathered, a satchel over one shoulder. No badge, no county seal, just a tired gaze and a strange familiarity. "I'm looking for the letter house," he said. "You found it," Ben answered, stepping forward. The man looked past him and saw Sarah standing in the doorway, the children behind her, and something in him settled. "I'm Michael," he said, "James's brother." Sarah didn't speak, not yet, because something else had just shifted in the world, and the next chapter had walked straight to her door. Michael Parker stood quietly on the porch, his hat in his hands, eyes drifting from the children to the patched canvas walls, and finally to the woman they all seemed to orbit around, like stars around a steady moon. Sarah didn't move. She studied him, not just his clothes or the road dust on his boots, but the way his shoulders drooped, the way his voice hadn't carried arrogance, only the tired weight of unfinished business. "You're James's brother," she said flatly. He nodded. "We hadn't spoken in years, not since before the war. He wrote me a letter a few months back, said he was dying, said he was sending for a woman who might be strong enough to do what he couldn't." The children gathered behind Sarah were silent. Even Katie, who had grown sharper than most adults, said nothing. It was Tommy who reached for her hand, eyes fixed on Michael. "I almost didn't come," Michael continued. "I thought it was another apology he didn't have the courage to say aloud. But then I saw this place." His eyes swept over the fire, the mailbox, the muddy boots, and cracked mugs lined with care. "And I knew it wasn't just talk." He opened his satchel and pulled out a second ledger, bound in the same worn fabric as the one Sarah had found months earlier beneath the floor of the Parker house. "He sent this to me," Michael said. "Kept copies of the letters he wrote you, some he never mailed. The last page is what made me come." He handed the book to Sarah. She opened it with reverence. The final entry in James's handwriting read, "If I die before she arrives, let her stay. Let her raise them, if they'll have her. And if they won't, bury this book with me and forgive me for hoping she would come anyway. If you're reading this, it means she did. So give her what I couldn't, the right to call them hers." Sarah folded the book closed. Her hands didn't shake, her breath didn't falter. "I stayed," she said softly, "and they let me." "I can see that," Michael replied. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small brass key. "It unlocks the safe under the floorboards in the old house," he said. "James left a deed inside. It's not perfect. There's still a lien on the land, but the paper bears his signature and intent. With that and the letter from the preacher, you've got enough to quiet the county." She took the key without speaking. The weight of it wasn't gold or silver, but it might as well have been. That night they celebrated, not with ribbons or fireworks, but with stew in every bowl and a fresh loaf of bread from Mrs. Fisher. Michael stayed, sitting beside the fire while Tommy fell asleep in his lap, and Lucy braided thread into his beard as if he'd always been there. He didn't resist, didn't flinch, just smiled, tired and warm, like he was rediscovering something he thought long lost. Days passed, then weeks. Winter bled into early spring, slow and stubborn. The snow melted reluctantly, revealing patches of earth that breathed again. Ben and Katie began digging a garden. Mary taught Lucy how to mend boots. Emma collected eggs from a coop they had finally built with Michael's help. The children no longer asked if Sarah was staying. They knew. One afternoon, Sarah stood in what used to be the center of their tent, now a solid timber-framed room with 3 real walls and a slanted roof. She was sewing a patch onto a quilt when Katie walked in, holding a folded paper. "From town," Katie said. "Sheriff Davis dropped it off." Sarah opened it slowly. It was stamped and sealed, but not with red. It was official recognition from the county, a statement of guardianship, signed by a judge naming Sarah Coleman as the legal caretaker of the Parker children and any others under her roof. Attached to it was the finalized deed to the land, bearing James's signature and a new line added beneath it. Transfer of rights to S. Coleman by choice and not blood. Sarah read it twice. Then she sat down and wept. Not the weeping of grief or fear, but the kind that only comes when something inside you finally settles. The kind that fills the cracks left behind by years of being unchosen. That night they held a feast. Neighbors came with honey, potatoes, dried peaches. The preacher brought a box of hymnals and a hand-carved sign. The Letter House. They mounted it above the door. Michael stayed longer than he'd planned. He never said it aloud, but he began sleeping in the back room and helping Tommy with his reading. Katie started calling him uncle without asking permission, but Sarah never remarried. She didn't need to. The house grew. A second room was added. A porch swing, real glass in the windows. The mailbox remained, nailed to the same tree, always holding at least one letter, sometimes written by the children, sometimes by someone passing through who needed to be heard. They never turned anyone away. In early summer, a girl arrived barefoot and silent, a scar on her cheek and no name to offer. Emma gave her one. Mary showed her how to wash. Katie taught her how to make stew. Sarah tucked a letter into her coat pocket that read, "You're safe, you're enough, and you are home." She stayed. Years later, the Letter House became more than a home. It became a place people sought out, whispered about on train platforms and in barber shops and at the back of general stores. "Go to the woman on the ridge," they'd say. "She's the one who doesn't ask what you've done, just asks if you're hungry." Sarah grew older, but never slower. She still mended buttons, still lit the fire each morning, still walked to the mailbox before breakfast and after supper. One autumn evening, long after the sun had dipped behind the trees, she sat by the hearth with the ledger in her lap. The last page, written in her careful hand, read, "If you find this place, know that no one here was born lucky, but we stayed. We built. We believed. And that made all the difference. This house is stitched from letters, not wood. But it holds, even in storms. So if you're lost or tired or just in need of something kind, come in. There's stew on the fire and we've been waiting for you." Outside the porch was lined with shoes. Inside the fire never went out.